Make a statement on misconduct and vetting in the Metropolitan Police Service following the horrific David Carrick case, and I thank you for your statement just there. Yesterday was a dark day for British policing and the Metropolitan Police, as an officer admitted being responsible for a monstrous campaign of abuse. Mr. Speaker, I am sure the whole House will want to join me in expressing my sympathy to the victims and thank them for their courage in coming forward. It is intolerable for them to have suffered as they have. They were manipulated and isolated and subjected to horrific abuse. For anyone to have gone through such torment is harrowing, but for it to have happened at the hands of someone they entrusted to keep people safe is almost beyond comprehension. The victims have shown extraordinary strength and courage. Their testimonies were essential in ensuring that Carrick faces justice for his crimes. It's thanks to them that this vile predator has been taken off our streets, and the public are safer as a result. Mr. Speaker, the police perform a unique and critical function in our society. Every day, thousands of decent, hard-working police officers perform their duties with the utmost professionalism. They feel pride in putting on their uniform and want only the best for the communities that they serve. I know that they will share our collective disgust that a fellow officer could be responsible for such a despicable betrayal of everything that they stand for. It's imperative that this cannot happen again. And so I'm grateful for Lady Eilish Angelini's assurance that she will look at this heinous case as part of her inquiry. Mr. Speaker, from the moment I became Home Secretary, I've made clear that things have to change. Public trust is precious. Our model of policing by consent cannot work effectively without it. I discussed this case yesterday with the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Mark Rowley, and I'm encouraged by the action that he has taken so far with his team to root out officers who are not fit to wear the badge. This effort is being spearheaded by a new anti-corruption and abuse command. But there is still some way to go to ensure that the force can command the trust of the people that it serves. It is vital that the Metropolitan Police and other forces double down on their efforts to root out corrupt officers. This may mean more shocking cases come to light in the short term. It's a matter of the utmost importance that there are robust processes in place to stop the wrong people joining the police in the first place, which is why the government has invested in improving recruitment processes and supporting vetting as part of over £3 billion that we have provided for the Police Uplift programme. I expect this work to continue at pace and for all Chief Constables to prioritise delivery of the recommendations made by the Police Inspectorate's recent report on vetting, counter-corruption and misogyny. It's now for the Metropolitan Police to demonstrate that they have an effective plan in place to rapidly improve their vetting processes. Much of the impetus for change must come from within policing, but this government will continue leading from the front. As I've been clear, we are bringing forward part 2 of the Angelini inquiry to make recommendations on how forces can improve culture and tackle the root causes of police criminality and misconduct. The inquiry was established by the then Home Secretary, my right honourable friend, the member for Witham, and I pay tribute to her for her commitment and leadership on these critical issues. As well as ensuring vetting processes are watertight, there must be fair and effective arrangements for dealing with those who behave or act in a wholly unacceptable way while serving. Baroness Casey has recently identified concerns with the misconduct and dismissals process within the Metropolitan Police. It takes too long, it doesn't command the confidence of police officers, and it's procedurally burdened. Bureaucracy and process appear to have prevailed over ethics and common sense. That's why I've announced an internal review into police dismissals. The review's terms of reference are being published today. Mr. Speaker, this case will rightly throw a spotlight once again on women's safety. No one should suffer abuse or feel frightened or harassed, whether they are at home, out and about, or online. We are taking concerted action to prevent violence against women, support victims and survivors, relentlessly pursue perpetrators, and strengthen the system as a whole. On rape specifically, we are focused on delivering improvements across the board so that victims get the support they deserve and cases are pursued rigorously from report to court. There have been some important steps forward since the publication of the Rape Review in 2021. The number of referrals and charges have increased nationally, while new operating models for the investigation and prosecution of rape are being developed through Operation Soteria. Mr. Speaker, none of this can undo the suffering of Carrick's victims. But I can assure the House that this government will not shy away from challenging the police to meet the standards we all expect of them. Change must happen, and as Home Secretary, I will do everything in my power to ensure that it does. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a truly shocking and appalling case, and I welcome the statement today, a serving police officer admitting to some of the most serious and devastating crimes. I join the Home Secretary in giving tribute to the bravery of the victims who have come forward, but we have to face up to the further evidence that this case has brought up of appalling failures in the police vetting and misconduct processes that are still not being addressed by the government and are not being addressed in this statement. And I would say to the Home Secretary that given the scale of the problems, not just in this case, but in previous cases as well, her statement is very weak and it shows a serious lack of leadership on something that is so grave and affects confidence in policing as well as serious crimes. We've seen repeated failures to respond or take seriously allegations of violence against women by a serving police officer, by other serving police officers, allegations of domestic abuse not taken seriously in the vetting processes, and in this case, a failure to suspend, for example, a failure to suspend David Carrick when rape allegations were made in July 2021, even though the Met Police knew there had been domestic abuse allegations 2 years previously, a misconduct process that concluded there was no case to answer despite the repeated alarms being raised, a full vetting check not triggered, and David Carrick's permission to carry firearms restored. And most shocking of all is that this happened at the height of the alarm about Wayne Couzens and the murder, the deeply disturbing murder of Sarah Everard. And this undermines confidence for women, confidence for victims, but also for police officers who are working so hard, and especially for women police officers who may themselves have reported misogynistic abuse, and for officers who are doing excellent work every day to tackle violence against women and girls and know that confidence in that work is being undermined. Now, we support the Commissioner's, the new Met Commissioner's determination to take action, but this is not just about the Met. We have had concerns about misogyny and culture raised in Sussex, in Hampshire, in Derbyshire, in Gwent, in Police Scotland, in other forces, and there has been a lack of leadership from the government on police standards for years. After the truly appalling murder of Sarah Everard by a serving police officer, Home Office ministers promised change. The then Home Secretary promised to set up processes that would prevent this happening again. And that has badly failed. There are still no legal requirements on vetting. Forces can effectively do what they want. They don't even have to check employment history and character references, and some don't. They don't even have to interview people beforehand. And when the Inspectorate came up with damning conclusions that hundreds, if not thousands, of police officers who should have failed vetting, including corrupt and predatory officers who have committed, including officers who have committed offences on indecent exposure and domestic abuse, are still in the job, the policing minister refused to even make it a requirement for police forces to follow the recommendations of the Inspectorate. They just shrugged and said that it was a matter for police forces to follow. There's been no response to make this compulsory to follow vetting guidance, no requirement to make it compulsory to follow the reforms. And all we've got in this statement is a continuation of existing Angelini review and a new review, another one on dismissals, which I welcome because there are concerns that the dismissals process has become more difficult and has become worse since well-intended reforms were introduced but have not worked as intended. So I welcome that review, but it was announced in October and it still hasn't started, and all the Home Secretary has done is re-announce it today. And some of the things that police forces have been doing to tackle misogyny or to increase diversity, to improve their response to communities and to crime, the Home Secretary has dismissed as woke, even though they are about tackling some of the most serious crimes. And it's about, too, how seriously they tackle violence against women and girls more broadly, where we know that the prosecution rate, the charge rate for rape, has dropped to a shameful 1.5%. It has dropped by 2/3 over the last 7 years. And again, Home Office ministers promised that tackling violence against women and girls would become part of the compulsory strategic policing requirement. It has been reported that that has not happened. Can she confirm that 9 months after ministers announced it, she has not made it a requirement in the strategic policing review to prioritise violence against women and girls? Mr. Speaker, after the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving officer, Labour called for change. After the horrific murders of Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman, Labour called for leadership. After the shameful case of Child Q, Labour called for reform. After the shocking Charing Cross station report, Labour demanded action. After the Stephen Port inquiry, Labour called for reform. And after the cases right across the country of abuse or of misogyny, Labour has demanded change. Conservative ministers promised action would be taken, but they have failed to do so. Labour will change the law. Labour will overhaul the vettings, misconduct and standards system, because it is time to change. And we are letting down police officers across the country who do excellent work and who are being let down by these failures in the system. And most of all, women are being let down. It's too late for all the warm words in the Home Secretary's statement. What is she actually going to do to make sure that standards are raised?
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a disappointment that the Shadow Home Secretary has resorted to cheap political lines. I don't think today is a day for political attacks. There's been a human tragedy at the heart of this case, and ultimately politics should be set aside. I'm willing to work with anybody, the Inspectorate, the overriding politician responsible for the Met Police, a Labour politician, Sadiq Khan. I'm willing to work with all the Chief Constables. I'm willing to work with everybody in this chamber so that we bring about change and safety and improved standards in our policing forces around the country. And that's why I support the statement of the police Commissioner, the Met Commissioner yesterday, where he accepts that there were failings. There's no question about that. There were failings in the system when it came to vetting and checking. There were failures by the Met Police. It's clear that culture and standards in police need to change. And that's why I'm clear as well that I'm not going to shy away from challenging Chief Constables all around the country on the standards that they uphold and instil in their individual forces. Police constables and police leaders have all accepted the recommendations set out in the comprehensive report by the Inspectorate, commissioned by this government in response to the Sarah Everard murder, to look into more closely what procedures have been put in place and how well they've been working when it comes to vetting and checking, monitoring and disciplinary processes relating to policing. It was clear that report identified several concerns and failings in policing. The bulk of those recommendations were aimed at chief constables, the College of Policing and the National Policing Council. All of those recommendations have been accepted, and we're closely monitoring the delivery of those improvements in rigour and standards when it comes to the entry processes, vetting and checking of new recruits to policing. We've also ensured that Lady Angelini will be looking more closely into culture in policing, to root out so that we can better implement and deliver systems that will root out misogyny, predatory behaviour, sexual assault or any other offensive behaviour that might lead to criminal activity within policing. But let me be clear, I'm very proud of this government's track record on supporting women and girls in the criminal justice system. It's this government that has put into place a groundbreaking Operation Soteria around the country to improve practices when it comes to the police investigation of rape and serious sexual offences, the prosecution phase and the court resolution phase. And we're already seeing signs of improvement when it comes to supporting victims of these heinous crimes through our criminal justice system. It's this government that introduced a raft of new offences to better protect women and girls in society, whether that's upskirting, our landmark Domestic Abuse Act, which expanded the definition and the protections available to victims of domestic abuse, stalking, female genital mutilation, forced marriage. I'm very proud of that leadership and that initiative that this government has demonstrated when it came to standing up for women and girls. But we won't be complacent. There is, of course, further we can go and more we can do. I'm keen to focus on the solutions and move forward so that we don't see repeated incidents and tragedies like the one we're talking about today.
Pretty Putter.
Mr. Speaker, it's a sorry and, in fact, tragic state of affairs that the House is convening to discuss this issue again today. There's no doubt about that, it really is. And I think the Home Secretary will fully recognise that reviews have been commissioned since 2021 that led to the Angelini inquiry, and it's part 2 that obviously this will feature into, and I think the Home Secretary, it'd be welcome if she could explain how that's going to work and when that would report. But since then we've had not only the Angelini work, we've had the Louise Casey review as well, which is damning. And I'm afraid the Inspectorate's report was also damning into a raft of issues which the Right Honourable Lady, the Shadow Home Secretary, has mentioned as well: security, vetting, misogyny, culture, practices, the whole culture in policing. Recommendations are already there. And in fact, if I may say so to the Home Secretary, previous policing ministers and myself put forward proper recommendations for the strategic policing requirement. There are issues that could be resolved, and actually people could be held to account sooner rather than later through that requirement. Can I urge her to consider, particularly of the tragic cases that we have heard about relating to this particular Carrick incident and his victims, that we start looking to put much of this on a statutory footing. If we don't do that, we are going to be here again and again and again, paying tribute to victims, while quite frankly, parts of the law enforcement system continue to fail the British public and fail victims.
Well, I want to reiterate my thanks and tribute to my Right Honourable friend for her leadership when she was in this role, leading from the front in the fight to protect women and girls and uphold their safety. Lady Eilish Angelini has confirmed that she will consider the Carrick case in her inquiry, and as I've mentioned, part 2 will be brought forward, and we expect it to provide an examination of the wider issues of policing, such as culture and vetting and the safety of women. Those are topics of relevance to this appalling case that we've heard about this week. And let me just confirm that when it comes to the strategic policing requirement, violence against women and girls will be included.
SNP spokesperson Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. And I also want to put on record the SNP's tribute to the victims in this case for their bravery in the face of the ongoing trauma that they have faced. The charges that have been brought against David Carrick are incredibly disturbing. 49 charges, including 24 counts of rape against 12 women over 2 decades, including incredibly disturbing accounts of domestic violence and coercive control. And yet through this, the Met have sought to protect their own, which is incredibly disturbing, and led to the former Victims Commissioner Vera Bay questioning the commitment to culture change at Scotland Yard. It has been reported that the Met is checking back through 1,633 cases of alleged sexual offences involving officers or involving 1,071 officers over the past decade. Can the Home Secretary tell us more about what retrospective action she expects from this review? Because it should be a worry to all of us that these officers are still out there, still in a job, and we may still face what David Carrick reportedly told women when he flashed his warrant card and told victims, I'm a police officer, you're safe with me. It is a chilling prospect. So I would ask the Home Secretary how she intends to make sure that that review is thoroughly carried out and what updates this House can expect. Lady Eilish Angelini has also worked with Police Scotland in improving standards on this, and work is ongoing in Scotland too. But I really would like to ask the Home Secretary, how can women and people with vulnerabilities have the confidence that if something happens to them while they are in London, that the Met will respond in a proper way that respects their dignity?
Home Secretary.
Well, the Honourable Lady asks a series of very good questions, and just to give a bit more detail about what the Met Commissioner has set out in terms of his commitment to strengthen the procedures. There's already a strengthening of vetting of officers, and there's an active review ongoing of historic cases where there may have been a flag on their system for domestic incidents. There's also a data washing process which is ongoing to ensure that their data is being checked against rigorously managed national databases in a very, very extensive way. And of course, this is all being led by a new anti-abuse and corruption command unit, which is actually instilling a much more institutional higher standard of vetting and managing and overseeing this very important issue.
Tim Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Apparently, Carrick was known as Bastard Dave by his colleagues, in just the same way as Wayne Couzens was known as the rapist. But alarm bells were not rung. So most worrying is the culture of cover-up and complacency that has allowed such abuse to go on an industrial scale by certain individuals, in this case by 17 years. So we were encouraged on the Home Affairs Select Committee when the new Met Commissioner gave his determination when he appeared before us to root out this mindset and these offenders. But can the Home Secretary say specifically in the queries and the concerns he raised, the difficulty to sack officers, why professional standards are not investigating more of these cases, that it's not suitable to be putting these officers accused of serious offences on light duties. They should be fully suspended, and there should be a duty of care of whistleblowing. What urgent action is she going to take on those issues now to restore some confidence in the Met in particular, and especially by women?
Home Secretary.
My right honourable friend raises a very good point about the disciplinary process, and indeed Sir Mark Rowley himself has spoken at length, not just at his committee, but more broadly about the challenges that he has faced in trying to dismiss patently inappropriate officers. And he's come up against a heavily bureaucratic process which isn't working. And that's why today I've launched a review into the process of police officer dismissals. I want to ensure that we have a fair and an effective system at removing those officers who are simply not fit to serve.
Of the Select Committee, Dave Diner-Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this case, which has rightly shocked the nation, is yet another appalling example of systematic failures within the police to confront male violence against women and girls and the sexist culture that exists within the police. Again and again, the Home Affairs Select Committee has heard evidence of how weak or non-existent vetting and misconduct processes have allowed violent male officers to continue harassing and abusing women, and not just in London, but in forces across the country. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner has, as I understand it, made specific demands of the Home Secretary in relation to changes around the dismissal of officers. So I wondered, could the Home Secretary just update the House as to what she's going to do about those specific requests? And why do we need a review when it's quite clear from the recommendations of His Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary and the reports that the Home Affairs Select Committee have produced of what needs to be done? We don't need another review, we just need action.
Secretary.
Well, I think that it's important that we do look closely at exactly what's happening when it comes to the police misconduct process. Concerns have been raised not only by Baroness Casey but also Sir Mark Rowley, and I think what I want to do is ensure that we have a system that's fit for purpose. For example, there's been concerns raised about the presence of the legally qualified chairs, and those are somehow applying a quasi-judicial approach to a system which should be much more akin to a disciplinary internal human resources disciplinary approach. That's been highlighted so far as not being fit for serving the purpose and achieving the goal that we all want, which is to empower chief constables to make decisions on disciplinary matters and for those to be sustained.
Jackie Doyle-Price.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, here we are again. It feels like Groundhog Day. I'm here questioning one of our ministers in a government that I support about culture within the Metropolitan Police Service. What is going to change? I listened very carefully to the Home Secretary, and she listed the new offences that this government is putting on the statute book with regard to protecting women and combating male violence against women and girls. But the real challenge is the culture towards women that exists within our police service and throughout our criminal justice system. Can I just repeat the question made by my right honourable friend, the member for Whittam? When are we really going to fully use statutory power to protect women from male violence?
Home Secretary.
Well, I think she raises a good point about police culture, and that's why we need to ensure that we have a good analysis of exactly what that means. We've got some important findings from the Inspectorate and also from Baroness Casey, which set out, and her findings are interim, they're not final, but they do set out serious concerns about police culture, which is leading to pockets of this unacceptable behaviour. We've already commissioned the Angelini inquiries. We must let those run their course, and on the basis of those robust findings, we'll be able to take the right action to ensure that this kind of behaviour is rooted out, that these kind of individuals are not allowed into the police force in the first place, and that we can better protect the public and install confidence amongst the public when it comes to policing.
We now come to Mother of the House, Arit Han.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for her statement, and I completely agree with the very strong questioning which was put by the Shadow Home Secretary, and also agree with what was said by the former Home Secretary and the current chair of the Select Committee. And I've got two questions. The first is about timing, and as honourable members have said, and as has been recognised and complained about by successive Metropolitan Commissioners, what they say is that the regulations that this House has put in place in statutory instruments prevent them sacking officers who they know are unfit to be in the Metropolitan Police. So that puts a responsibility on us to change those regulations. Can I suggest that she, in consultation with the Metropolitan Police, brings forward draft regulations, and let's consult, not in the overall generality of a review, but let's consult on those specific draft regulations and we will be 100% behind her when she brings to the House change regulations so that the Metropolitan Police are able to manage the force in the way that we all want to see them managed. And the second point is about the Sir Mark Rowley and the response to the Carrick situation, is that it is not just about change in the future, but it's about dealing with those individuals who are currently in senior and management positions in the Met, who seem to think that it was all right for Carrick to be given extra responsibilities, to be promoted, and really an examination of the management suitability of those officers ought to be examined by the Metropolitan Commissioner, and we need a bit of transparency about that. So will she urge the Metropolitan Commissioner, who we're all supporting in his determination for culture change, to do a transparent publication of what tracking he has gone through of when Carrick was looked at and nothing was done, because all of those senior officers have colluded, and will he also look through at a horizontal level all of those officers who were part of banter, who were part of the immediate culture of this officer, who did nothing to report him and therefore were colluding in the perpetuation of these atrocious crimes.
I want to do what works, and that's why I've taken very seriously what the Met Commissioner has said about the process relating to police misconduct hearings and disciplinary processes. I've been clear that where there is a role for government, we will act, but it's important that we look carefully at the issue. That's why the review that I've just announced will cover issues like the legally qualified chairs to ensure that they are actually striking the right balance and the decisions that they are making are the right ones. It's important that we ensure that the trends in the use of misconduct sanctions and the consistency of decision-making in cases of sexual misconduct and other violence against women and girls and those offences are appropriate. Those are kinds of things that we need to look at very carefully. When it comes to the Metropolitan Police, as I said, the Met Commissioner has instituted a new anti-corruption and abuse command specifically to look at any other risk factors and any other issues relating to this kind of incident. An extra 100 officers were drafted in to use covert tactics to identify those officers who act in a corrupt or predatory manner, including those who abuse their positions in the police. I'm encouraged by those early commitments by the Met Commissioner, and I think we need to get behind him so that we can radically improve the system.
James Daly.
Very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think Sir Mark Rowley's statement was pathetic yesterday. A statement of the blindingly obvious, and anybody can say sorry for what's gone on. This is an absolute scandal, and I wish to support what the Mother of the House has just said. In no comment that has been made is there been any suggestion of accountability for anybody else within the Metropolitan Police over many years regarding this man's conduct. His egregious behaviour was known. There were 7 or 8 allegations regarding his behaviour, yet nothing was done. Excuse after excuse after excuse. We can worry about the future, but there are people within the Metropolitan Police who enabled this man to continue being a threat to women and girls, and they should be sacked.
It's important to note that David Carrick's initial vetting to join the Metropolitan Police took place in 2001, and that was prior to the introduction of national standards on vetting and prior to the regime which has been in place since 2017. And that was introduced to ensure consistency in decision-making. My honourable friend rightly expresses frustration with the situation, and I agree with him. It is incredibly frustrating to be here yet again on another tragedy. I would just gently push back. I have confidence in Sir Mark Rowley. I think that he has joined the leadership of the Met very recently, and he's not hesitated in accepting the enormity of the problems that the Met Police is currently facing. He's presented a plan, is already taking tangible action to deliver on that plan. He understands that there is a a problem with confidence in the Met Police. There are challenges and problems with standards and performance. He's honest and frank about those challenges and is not shying away about fixing them.
Thank you, Mr
Deputy Speaker. Could I ask the Home Secretary who will be conducting this review, the internal review? When will it report? And could she ensure that previous Metropolitan Commissioners also give evidence to that review?
Yeah.
Well, the review will be carried out in a comprehensive and extensive way to command confidence amongst police officers, members of the public and other stakeholders. And I want it to report swiftly. I am wary of more reviews and reports and inquiries. We need action. My impression is that there is a real problem with the process. I need to identify exactly what needs fixing, and therefore thereafter we can take swift action.
Mr Deputy Speaker, may I mirror the Home Secretary's comments to pay tribute to the victims of David Carrick, and also urge other victims to come forward if they've got any concerns about serving police officers or anybody else. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it is important to support the Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, in his quest to rid the rot of the culture in the Metropolitan Police? And I hear that, you know, the Commissioner is now investigating nearly 1,000 police officers and staff, and so we have to prepare ourselves for further revelations similar to Carrick. But does she also agree with me that it's important that the Police and Crime Commissioner for London and his Deputy Mayor for Policing also play their part, and that perhaps they have been missing in action over the last 7 years?
Well, I think my honourable friend makes a very good point. Ultimately, the politician responsible for the performance of the Metropolitan Police is the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, and ultimately he should be held politically responsible for failings within the Met. Greater support, greater priority, greater focus from him would do no harm.
Butler.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. My respect also goes out to the brave women who have come forward, but women shouldn't need to be brave. The system should protect them and believe them when they speak out. On the 20th of September 2021, Byline News reported that more than half Met officers found guilty of sexual misconduct kept their jobs. Sure. There's a report today that says some women that report sexual abuse or misconduct may see one of those officers. The Met cannot guarantee that they're not using their power to do that. What's been exposed in the Met is structural and institutional, and I wonder if the Minister agrees with that or even understands that. And does the Minister agree that Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, was right to sack Cressida Dick? And can I just say that the Minister's approach today in the Chamber, this slow kind of kick the can down the road, we'll do another review, only serves to inflict more pain on women and girls. And really the Minister needs to take that on board if she's to do her job properly. And we also need to review all of the cases that these criminal police officers have presided over, because if they're bad, they're bad. They're not just bad in one case, they're bad in all cases. Can I just say, Mr Deputy Speaker, in Brent, the tragic murder of Bibba Henry and Nicole Smallman, who were murdered and the police took pictures of their bodies, the pain that their mother goes through, and I speak to their mother on a regular basis, every time there's something like this, it just inflicts more triggering pain on people who have gone through, and the police were slow to act. Now, the Minister can do something about this. The new Commissioner, Mark Rowley, has said that he needs more support in being able to sack officers, not another review. Not another review, another report. He needs things to change. And as chair of the London PLP, I just wonder if the Secretary of State is willing to listen to voices from the London PLP and work with us, as well as the Met Commissioner, to change the law and legislation around this.
Well, there are some fair points raised there, and what I find very instructive on this issue, albeit on an interim basis, is the report, an interim report by Baroness Casey, which looked into the Met, its standards on vetting and procedures, and it did make for very concerning reading. It was a very in-depth, she is currently carrying out a very in-depth inquiry into this subject, and she found that the Met doesn't fully support the local professional standards units to deal with misconduct effectively, so effectively the structure relating to individual commands isn't working. There is an uncertainty about what constitutes gross misconduct and what will be done about it. There are some really important lessons to be learned from Baroness Casey's inquiry into the Met so that we can make sure that things like this don't happen again.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. David Carrick is now one of the UK's most prolific ever rapists, and he did this while serving as a police officer. It's utterly disgusting. But does the Home Secretary agree with me that we should review sentencing laws? We've already done it for people that kill emergency workers. So how about reviewing the sentencing law so if a serving police officer commits these horrible crimes, we increase their sentence? And does she also agree with me that the managers that knew about this should be sacked immediately and their pensions given to the victims?
Please remember sub judice, that we shouldn't be talking about sentencing. Home Secretary, just answer the points that you can.
Well, my honourable friend, again, voices the frustration and disappointment that we are all feeling today, that a serving police officer has been found responsible for such heinous and appalling crimes, an abuse of trust, has shattered public confidence in policing and has undermined the safety of women and girls. We are not going to shy away from doing what is necessary to ensure that cases like this are not repeated and that women and girls in particular can have confidence in policing around the country.
Just to remind everybody, there are aspects of this that are sub judice. Please stay well away from anything relating to things that are still before the courts. Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I too commend the bravery of the women involved in this case, but frankly, some of those women would not have required to have been brave if action had been taken. Yep. As a former police officer, I am disgusted and ashamed by what I've heard. But the Metropolitan Commissioner has said that 800 of his officers are under investigation. Has the Home Secretary required similar figures from other police forces? What is the impact on the operational capability of police officers to do their business? And finally, as the Mother of the House rightly pointed out, police officers are not employed. They are not subject to employment law. They are appointed. And actually, the staff associations within the police service, such as the Federation, play a very important role in disciplinary and conduct. So what engagement is the Home Secretary having with them?
Well, the Inspectorate reported late last year into this issue, looking at forces all over the country and looking at their performance when it comes to vetting and monitoring of disciplinary matters when it comes within policing. The Inspectorate made 43 recommendations, largely focused at Chief Constables around England and Wales, the College of Policing and the MPCC. They've all been accepted. They have to be, there are deadlines for spring of this year and then later of this year, and we're closely monitoring the implementation and delivery of all of those recommendations.
Rachel McLean.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. We hear reported on the BBC that this monster, David Carrick, perpetrated a campaign of terror against his girlfriends. He put drugs in the car, he restrained her with police handcuffs. He said, "Who would anyone believe? You or me? I'm an important person, I guard the Prime Minister, I'm a police officer." This highlights the lengths to which this monster would go and also the challenge for those victims to come forward. So as well as the very welcome measures that the Home Secretary set out before us today, all of which I support, does she agree with me that one thing we can do, a positive thing we can do, is bring forward the Victims Bill to strengthen the support of the criminal justice system to these women, to provide better support, to beef up the role of the independent sexual violence advisors? I know it's not her department, but will she work with me and work with her colleague, the Justice Secretary, to see if we can get parliamentary time for this bill as quickly as possible?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I pay tribute to her groundbreaking work when she was in government to support women and girls and their safety. She's absolutely right, and that's why my right honourable friend, the Lord Chancellor, Deputy Prime Minister, is committed to introducing the Victims' Bill. I'm particularly supportive of increasing the number of ISVAs and IDVAs. I think they've made a huge difference to the experience of victims going through the criminal justice system. They can make the difference between a victim withdrawing and a victim persisting and reaching a conviction. So I think, yes, putting more resources through and introducing important legislation is absolutely vital.
Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. When the Education Secretary was asked on the radio yesterday if the government could say that women could trust the police, she replied, "It's very important that we do trust the police." In other words, I think that's a no. We cannot have a situation where women who would ordinarily be turning to the police to rescue them from dangerous situations, whether it's out on the street, whether it's domestic violence, whether they're the victim of abuse, feel that the very person that they might be seeking help from is somebody that they can't trust and might actually violate them as well. So I endorse what everyone has said about we need to address this culture within the police force, but can the Home Secretary set out a timetable where she can tell us what immediate action she will take to address this so that women who are in danger feel that they can look to the police for support?
Listen, I'll be the first person to say that this is obviously a disappointing, frustrating, sobering and chilling day for policing. And it is regrettable and a shame that this has happened. I would also say that the poorly behaved, the criminal police officers do make up a minority. And we do have tens of thousands of very brave, dedicated men and women all over the country who will be feeling the equivalent level of shame and disgust that we are expressing here today. This is not in their name. This is about changing a system so that we root out poor behaviour and so that everybody can be proud to be serving in our police force.
Mary Robinson.
Deputy Speaker, the case has once again highlighted the terrible internal processes within our police forces and also the inability of people to speak up in a culture which actively works against them doing so. So many police officers will not raise issues with fellow police officers because they fear for their jobs, they fear for their employments. Will my right honourable friend take this opportunity to do a root and branch investigation into the culture within the police forces, particularly with regard to the ability to speak up and whistleblowers to have their voices heard?
It's an important point that my honourable friend raises, and that is exactly what part 2 of the Lady Angelini inquiry will cover: police culture and how and whether there is a culture of fear, whether people are scared to speak up and call out unacceptable behaviour. We need to pinpoint it precisely so that we can then take action to ensure that there is an open and welcoming and professional environment within which everybody can thrive.
Carol Moynihan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. There are many similarities here in the experience of women within the police, the Met Police, and women within the armed forces. Both organisations in which we should have complete faith, but both organisations which have failed to act on many occasions where there are situations of misogyny. There are two big issues for me here. There are the crimes of the perpetrator himself, but there is also the failure of senior officers to act and take action when concerns have been raised. Now, the Home Secretary has talked about how action is going to be taken on offenders. She's said much less about what's going to happen with senior officers who are aware of such behaviour and have covered it up. Could she say some more about that, please?
Here.
Well, I think that goes to the point about the structures in place to closely monitor new recruits and ensure that people who are newer to policing get the right training and support from their senior leaders. And that's why, as part of our historic Police Uplift programme, which is going to result in record numbers of police officers when we are complete in a few months' time, A large part of that resource has gone to increasing the vetting capacity, the recruitment resource, so that proper standards and quality assurance is injected and really part of the process of recruiting new police officers.
Simon Fell.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We operate on a model of policing by consent, and I'm afraid too many people, especially women and girls, will be looking at this and saying, I don't consent, I don't agree to this model of policing in the country anymore, and this is just the latest example of what we've seen in the Met. Cases like this set back trust in the police. They make it more difficult for decent, law-abiding officers to do their jobs. And it's shameful that Carrick's case has been allowed to carry on for so long with information apparently known to the force and other forces without being shared, without action being taken on it. So there are clear lessons we can learn here about data sharing, about improving whistleblowing, about suspending officers without allowing them to operate on light duties, about removing officers who we are deeply concerned about. It's great that we are having these reviews, it's great we're trying to learn lessons from them, but I think what people want is concrete action, and action quickly. Can the Home Secretary please advise when we will see that?
Well, as I said, my honourable friend raises the right point about action, and that's why a recent review of vetting capacity as of recently as October of last year, carried out by the Uplift programme, showed that 36 forces had responded and 25 had increased their capacity in vetting units between February and October of last year. I see that as action. I see that as police forces responding to the call to improve their services, improve their resources, and ensure that there are better processes and better systems in place to properly vet and rigorously monitor the behaviour of their professionals.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and good afternoon. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as a former detective inspector in the Metropolitan Police, like everyone, I am shocked, revulsed and horrified to hear of the horrent crimes of PC Carrick and the failure of the Metropolitan Police and other police services which allowed these crimes to go undetected and unprosecuted for almost 20 years. Mr. Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the hundreds of thousands of honest, hard-working and brave serving and retired police officers everywhere, I offer my sincere apologies to the victims in these cases, whose needs must be prioritised and given our complete and unquestioning support. Will the Home Secretary confirm to the House that an investigation will be launched immediately, as identified in her review announced today, to identify and prosecute to the full extent of the law or the most severe disciplinary action against any police officer or member of the police staff, past or present, who failed in their duty to protect the public in public office by not reporting or investigating complaints against PC Carrick and preventing him from being arrested, prosecuted and brought to justice before now?
I can't comment on the individual case, but what Baroness Casey's review concluded on an interim basis late last year was that it's taking too long to resolve misconduct cases within policing. Officers and staff do not believe that action will be taken when concerns around conduct are raised. Those are just a sample of some of the very serious concerns that she identified when it comes to the process in place for monitoring and disciplining police officers for unacceptable behaviour. I pay tribute to the Honourable Gentleman's service within the police force, but I know that whatever is needed to be changed, we will do it.
Bailey.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, women in Stroud and around the country have woken up with their trust and belief in our police service badly shaken yet again. And I know from speaking to local women that issues in the Met undermine their confidence in Stroud Police, and they can see that the Gloucestershire Constabulary is working hard to protect them, and they can see that they're open to change. But when we know that women are routinely not reporting violence, abuse and harassment, in part because of lack of faith in the police, and with each force doing something completely different, what is my right honourable friend doing to ensure that all police forces get their act together and show the country that they are speaking to each other and that we're going to make national change on this issue?
My honourable friend's absolutely right to raise the issue about the confidence of women in policing. Tangible steps and measures have already been taken after legislating in the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act to address concerns surrounding data extraction from victims' devices during investigations. We are well on the way to ensuring that victims are not without a phone for more than 24 hours. That's been a real deterrent to women coming forward with complaints about rape or serious sexual offences. We've led with the groundbreaking Operation Soteria programme, radical transformation on the way the police investigate rape and serious sexual offences. We're also protecting the well-being of victims during trials by offering pre-recorded evidence for rape victims. Those are just a few of the measures that we are taking to send the message to women and girls: come forward if you are a victim, and if you do, the police will be there to support you.
Lawrence Shalami.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary just mentioned that she wants women and girls to come forward with those issues and allegations of rape. The charge rate for rape is 1.5%. This means that the vast majority of those cases will never go to court, let alone secure a conviction. This is not working for women and girls. The courage that they have in coming forward, then to know that it will never secure that. It's a slap in the face yet again for those women and girls. What real action is the Home Secretary going to change to reverse this?
Well, I've been working with cross-government colleagues for several years now in my former capacity as the Attorney General on matters like Operation Soteria. And Operation Soteria is groundbreaking, and it is producing real change in the way victims of rape and serious sexual offences are experiencing the criminal justice system. We are seeing an increase in referrals by the police to the Crown Prosecution Service. That is a sign of progress. We are seeing an increase in the rate of charge by the Crown Prosecution passing the case on to the court service. And we will see an improvement in the number of convictions that we secure. I agree, there is a lot to do, but progress has been made.
Laura Farris.
The first allegation of serious sexual assault was made against David Carrick in 2003, and over the course of the next 18 years, there were 8 or 9 allegations of rape, and through all of that, he was not suspended from work. In fact, during that period, he was actually promoted within the force. What is common to all of these cases is that there appears to be some kind of omerta or closing of ranks between senior personnel when a criminal allegation is made against one of their brethren. Does my right honourable friend agree that the time has come to outsource the disciplinary decision-making decision to either another force or, at the very least, an officer who does not know the policeman who is the subject matter of this kind of allegation?
My honourable friend's right to point to the failings. In sum, the Metropolitan Police should have carried out a revet of David Carrick in 2011. This wasn't done until 2017. And the Metropolitan Police acknowledge that this would not have necessarily changed the vetting outcome. So those systemic problems are prevalent, and that's why we need to take action to fix them.
Ed Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. We're back again, Home Secretary. I'm just exhausted about the number of times in this House we have to talk about this issue. Because women in Lancashire have seen what's happened and what's been in the newspapers about David Carrick, and they saw about Wayne Couzens, and they've seen about so many other cases, Home Secretary. And they want to know why there is no legal requirement for vetting when officers move between forces. So yes, we're talking about the Met today, but we could equally be talking about Lancashire Constabulary. So Home Secretary, I'd like to know what plans are in place to legally require vetting when officers move between forces to stop these perpetrators moving around the country to avoid justice.
Well, we need to ensure that there's the right system in place to actually properly identify inappropriate candidates. What we've seen thus far is that actually there are inappropriate processes so that people who are not right for policing are falling through the gaps, falling through the net. That needs to change. That's why I'm glad that the Met Commissioner has actually already committed to instilling an anti-corruption and abuse command unit to properly look at how people are who are inappropriately getting into the police force, and we will take further action to look at the disciplinary process and the reports which are currently running their course need to conclude, so we have an evidence base to take the appropriate action in legislation if necessary.
Teresa Villiers.
An utterly shameful and appalling case. I've seldom seen such a palpable sense of shock in this chamber as we've witnessed today. And in responding to these terrible crimes, I hope the Home Secretary will also look at the Benjamin Hannam case of a few years back, where it is deeply worrying that someone who had been a member of a banned extremist group, National Action, managed to be recruited as a probationary police officer.
Well, I think all cases are abhorrent, and where confidence in policing is shattered and the reputation of the force is undermined. That's why we want to ensure that chief constables take the recommended action which has been set out comprehensively, increasing the minimum standards for pre-employment checks, establishing better processes for managing risks relating to vetting decisions, and ensuring that the quality and consistency of their vetting decision-making is improved.
Karen Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I undertook the police and parliamentary scheme with both the Metropolitan Police and Avon and Somerset, going into the homes and situations of the country's most vulnerable people, overwhelmingly women. That those women can't be confident about those police officers is an abhorrent situation. But we've heard nothing from the Home Secretary about what she's going to do to finally introduce mandatory national views on vetting. People in Bristol, particularly women in Bristol, want to know that all those police officers are being vetted appropriately, that applies across the country. Will she now commit to that being operationalised?
Well, the government legislated in February of 2020 to strengthen the police complaints and discipline systems, making them more transparent, more proportionate and more accountable. This included new powers for the independent office, the IOPC, including the power of initiative, ensuring that the IOPC can commence investigations without requiring a referral from the police, as well as measures to streamline and speed up decision-making. Those build on previous reforms, and as I've announced today, we will carry out a more in-depth review into the disciplinary process, and if legislation is needed to change, then we will do that.
Apollo Byrne.
Utterly shameful and shocking case. The vast majority of police officers in the Met and across the country believe in and perform to the highest professional standards, but they want to see their fellow officers who do not have appropriate action taken against them. But the problem is they just don't believe that appropriate action will be taken. And chief constables are tearing their hair out because they know they have some officers who are not fit to be in the police service, but they can't dismiss them easily. So can I join the calls from the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Camberwell and Peckham, for the government to bring forward legislation to revise the dismissal procedures for police officers, because the sooner we get rid of police officers who are not fit to serve, the better it will be for all concerned.
I agree wholeheartedly with my right honourable friend. As Baroness Casey identified in her interim review at the end of last year, the misconduct process takes too long. Officers and staff don't have confidence in the process. Allegations relating to sexual misconduct, other discriminatory behaviour are less likely than other misconduct allegations to result in a case to answer decision. There is a real need for action to take place. That's why we're going to come up with the proposals on the back of the review that I've announced today.
Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. When Sarah Everard was abducted from a street in Lambeth, not far from my constituency, and brutally murdered by a serving police officer with a history of predatory behaviour, the then Deputy Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police said there was zero tolerance of misogyny in the Met. The appalling crimes of David Carrick show that this was clearly not the case, and the current Commissioner says that there are between 800 and 1,000 officers currently under investigation for abuse. So can I ask the Home Secretary, because she hasn't answered this question so far today, What is she doing to ensure that there are actually consequences and accountability for the enablers in police forces up and down the country who protect abusers and allow them to continue their activities under cover of their warrant card? Because dealing with that issue is an essential prerequisite for zero tolerance to mean anything at all.
Well, the action that needs to be taken has been set out incredibly widely and comprehensively in several reports. That includes increasing the minimum standards for pre-employment checks, establishing better processes for assessing, analysing and managing the risks relating to vetting decisions, corruption investigations and information security, improving the quality and the consistency of decision-making when it comes to vetting, and extending the scope of the law relating to the police complaint and misconduct procedures. There's a very clear plan of action that is necessary amongst Chief Constables, the College of Policing and the MPPC, and the Home Office is monitoring and taking action where necessary.
Richard Graham.
Mr Deputy Speaker, today's debate shows the depth of violence against women and girls, even by some of those in whom the public should have the greatest trust, and therefore public confidence in policing will be rattled. The Home Secretary said that David Carrick had been recruited before tightened vetting rules were introduced. So will my right honourable friend work with local police chiefs to find out how many people in their forces are, in their view, potentially dangerous to the wider public, so that they and we can reassure our constituents as soon as possible that there are no David Carricks lurking in Gloucestershire or elsewhere?
Well, that is exactly why, for the Met, the Met Commissioner has instituted a review of historic cases where there may be a flag for a domestic incident, and they are rigorously checking their data against national databases. I encourage all Chief Constables to take similar action to ensure that similar cases can be rooted out and action can be taken.
Clay Bedford.
Mr Deputy Speaker, the problems that Mark Rowley faces in the Metropolitan Police run very deep indeed. I've been supporting a constituent of mine with her allegations of threatening and controlling behaviour against a senior police officer. And in the 2 years that I've been supporting her, the police have completely failed to investigate the case properly. They've failed to consider the impact on the children, failed to interview witnesses, failed to get essential medical records. And these are senior officers that are standing in the way of this investigation, as was the case with Wayne Cousins, as was the case with David Carrick. So Mark Rowley is making specific requests to assist him in making the changes that he needs to make in the Metropolitan Police. We cannot wait for another review. So will she commit to sitting down with Mark Rowley and give him the resources and the support that he needs now?
Very good. Very good.
May I just clarify one point that I referred to earlier? When it comes to some of the findings of Baroness Casey, I just want to be clear that the allegations that she found relating to sexual misconduct and other discriminatory behaviours are less likely than other misconduct allegations to result in a case-to-answer decision. I think I might have said the opposite before. But what I say, I agree. That's why I've built a very strong relationship with Sir Mark Rowley. I spoke to him yesterday. I have been speaking to him regularly about exactly what action we are taking, both from a parliamentary and legislative point of view, but also from an operational perspective on the ground.
This is an appalling case and another very dark day for the Metropolitan Police, for our trust in them, and particularly for women's trust in them. It's not the first, and I fear it won't be the last. While I applaud what the government is doing in terms of better prosecution of rape and support for victims, those are after the fact. We need to work on prevention, and prevention comes through culture, as many others have said. Does she agree that there are two aspects of that culture? There's the casual day-to-day misogyny that we see from the nicknames that some of their fellow officers, not all, had for them themselves. But there's also the institutional misogyny and denial that came from the multiple reports that were made to the Metropolitan Police, the opportunities for vetting that were all missed and resulted in many, many more rapes. And will she work with the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police to address both these aspects of the culture?
my honourable friend's absolutely right that I must say that the vast majority of police officers uphold the highest standards of behaviour and professionalism, but there are pockets of culture whereby standards fall short. We need to root that out, and the first thing to do is to identify exactly what form it takes, the extent to which it is prevalent, and then we will know the steps that we can legitimately take to stop it happening again.
Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. David Carrick was a Metropolitan Police officer, but many of his crimes were perpetrated in Hertfordshire, where many of them would have been reported. As a Hertfordshire MP, I would like to pay tribute to the bravery and perseverance of the rape survivors, but could I ask the Secretary of State, will the actions or inaction of Hertfordshire Police be looked at as part of any review? And could I push her again, as many other colleagues have done, to confirm that she will introduce vetting of officers when they transfer between forces, and will she also look at outsourcing disciplinary actions?
Well, there is obviously going to be the Carrick case will be looked at by Lady Angelini, and hopefully those issues that she refers to will be fleshed out. But I am also interested in the point that she raises about transfer of police officers. It's been identified that insufficient vetting is taking place when police officers are moving between forces. We need to take the action to improve that.
Lloyd Russell-Moyle.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This is another case and a long list of cases, and it's not just on misogyny, it's on race and it's on homophobia. Yeah. And we know that when Sadiq Khan called in the Commissioner and asked her, the then Commissioner, to produce a report about what she was going to do, rather than doing her work, she walked out the door and had the backing of this government rather than backing Sadiq Khan. Yeah. So now we know that this is a systemic problem in the Metropolitan Police and probably police around the country. Is it time that we move disciplinary matters away from the police force concerned and allow women and other victims to be able to report to an independent service when it's regarding a police officer without fear or favour that it will be covered up?
Well, I think what is important is that we ensure that whatever disciplinary process is in place is that it actually works. It's clear that there are serious questions about its efficacy, the time it takes, the process-heavy experience, and ultimately that bureaucracy and procedure are prevailing over ethics and common sense. We need to ensure that the system is fit for purpose and that police officers who are falling short in their behaviour are dismissed.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This is a policing issue, but it's not just a matter for policing. It's also a societal issue, and how we deal with predators who are determined and devious. It's a fundamental issue about safeguarding and the professional misjudgments that are made that allow this behaviour to go unreported. Will the Home Secretary raise the issue of safeguarding and its need to cut across all policy areas to ensure that vulnerable people are protected with her Cabinet colleagues?
Well, we have a designated Minister for Safeguarding. She sits alongside me here, and so definitely in the Home Office we prioritise the welfare of women and girls and victims of crime more generally. There's a huge project of work ongoing, an important relationship with stakeholders, and it's important that confidence amongst victims and those who are directly affected by these heinous crimes are supported in the maximum possible way by the criminal justice system.
Jim Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank very much the Home Secretary for outlining her plan of action to respond in a positive and strong way. Trust in the police is an essential component of the justice system, and whilst it is clear that trust has been broken and down, we cannot forget that that there is an overwhelming number of decent and solid policemen and policewomen in our forces across the United Kingdom. Rebuilding trust in the screening process may take some work. So how does the Home Secretary intend to ensure that all local forces implement lessons learned in the Met to restore confidence? Because confidence restored is what we need. Thank you.
Home Secretary.
The Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right, and there is a large amount of work now, not only for the Met, but also the wider policing family to restore and rebuild trust and confidence amongst the general public, but also women and girls. I visited some local forces. Kent Police I visited before Christmas, and actually there is a very good example of how the force is really leading from the front, instituting a whole raft of operational measures to support victims of serious sexual offences and rape, and rebuilding trust with local communities. So it is possible, and I'm very heartened by the progress that I'm seeing around the country.
That completes the statements. Those who wish to leave, please do so. Right, we come to the next statement. I call the Secretary of State for Scotland, Alistair Jack.
Mr. Speaker, today I will make an order under Section 35 of the Scotland Act 1998, preventing the Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill from proceeding to royal assent. This order will mean the presiding officer of the Scottish Parliament will not submit the bill for royal assent. This government believes, however, that transgender people deserve our respect, our support and our understanding. My decision is centred on the legislation's consequences for the operation of reserved matters, including equality legislation across Scotland, England and Wales. The Scottish Government's bill would introduce a new process for applying for legal gender recognition in Scotland. The changes include reducing the minimum age a person can apply for a gender recognition certificate from 18 to 16, and removing the need for a medical diagnosis and evidence of having lived for 2 years in their acquired gender. The bill would amend the Gender Recognition Act 2004, which legislated for a single gender recognition system across the United Kingdom and which received a legislative consent motion from the Scottish Parliament. The approach taken in the Scottish Government's Gender Recognition Reform Bill was the subject of intense debate in the Scottish